Hey guys! Tonight we slip into the vibrant world of Ottoman Istanbul, where scribes hoard the finest inks like treasures. Their workshops alive with the scratch of reeds and the scent of secrets. Picture yourself in a bustling 16th century scriptorium, sunlight streaming through latticed windows, catching tiny jars of gleaming black and crimson liquids. A scribe, his fingers stained, guards his inkpots like a dragon hoarding gold, each vial a key to his craft's perfection. Why this obsession? You're about to dive in, but fair warning, surviving a day in this ink-soaked, calligraphy-crazed empire might be trickier than you think. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Istanbul, 1550, where the air hums with mosque calls and the clatter of bazaar carts. Scribes, the unsung artists of the Ottoman Empire, are everywhere hunched over desks in madrasas, palaces, and market stalls, their reed pens dancing across parchment. Mainstream history tells us these scribes were vital, crafting everything, from sultans' decrees to poetry, their calligraphy a bridge between the divine and the mundane. Ink wasn't just a tool, it was their lifeblood, and the finest ones, deep, glossy, and smooth, were hoarded fiercely. A single jar could cost more than a month's wages, and scribes often mixed their own, guarding recipes like state secrets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed certain inks held mystical powers, like warding off evil or ensuring a manuscript's longevity. Imagine stirring a pot of ink and thinking you're brewing magic. Historians still argue whether ink hoarding was purely practical, driven by cost and quality, or a cultural flex, a way to show off skill and status. You're in a scribe's workshop now, the walls lined with shelves of clay pots and glass vials. A scribe named Mustafa, his turban slightly askew, dips his pen into a jet black ink, his strokes precise as a dancer's. You smell the sharp tang of gall nut and the faint sweetness of gum arabic, the room warm with the flicker of oil lamps. Every scribe has their favorite ink, Mustafa explains, and his is a blend he's perfected over years. You try dipping a pen yourself, but the ink blobs. Yep, you're no calligrapher. Joke number 1. Maybe your ink skills are more modern art than Ottoman masterpiece. The obsession with ink makes sense here. A bad batch could ruin a page, waste days, or worse, anger a patron like the Sultan himself. Mustafa's got a locked chest under his desk, stuffed with his best files. You raise an eyebrow. Hoarding much? Outside, the city pulses with life merchants, shouting, donkeys braying, but in here, it's all focus and finesse. You notice Mustafa's hands, calloused but steady, and wonder about the stakes. Ink wasn't just about beauty, it carried power. A perfectly inked document could seal an empire's fate, while a smudge might cost a scribe his reputation. You think of modern equivalents, like obsessing over the perfect laptop or paintbrush, but this feels weightier. Joke number 2. If Mustafa had Wi-Fi, he'd probably hide his router like his ink chest. The workshop's rhythm scratch, dip, scratch lulls you, but there's a story behind every drop of ink, from its ingredients to its guarded jars. You lean closer, the lamplight warm, ready to uncover the craft's secrets. You're still in Mustafa's workshop, the air thick with the tang of ink and the soft scratch of his reed pen against parchment. Your corset's long gone, replaced by a loose Ottoman robe, but you're too busy eyeing the cluttered table to care. You're here to mix the rare ingredients that make the scribe's prized inks, a process as guarded as a sultan's harem. Mainstream history tells us Ottoman inks were complex blends, often made from gallnuts, iron salts, and gum arabic, cooked for days to achieve that perfect glossy sheen. These weren't just liquids. They were alchemy, each recipe a scribe's signature. You grab a mortar and pestle, ready to grind some gallnuts, those weird, apple-like growths from oak trees, and feel like a medieval chemist. The room's warm, the oil lamps casting shadows on clay pots filled with mysterious powders. Mustafa hands you a handful of gallnuts, their surface knobby and brown. You crush them, releasing a bitter scent that stings your nose. He adds a pinch of saffron for color, a quirky tidbit. Some scribes used crushed beetle's cochineal to get a vivid red ink, believing it added life to their work. You imagine squashing bugs for art and wince. Joke number 1. Beetle ink sounds like the Ottoman version of organic, farm-to-table crafting. You stir the mix with water and iron salts, watching it darken to a deep, inky black. Mustafa nods, but his eyes say, "Don't mess this up." The process is slow, almost meditative, but one wrong move, like too much gum arabic, and your ink's either too sticky or too runny. No pressure, right? Historians still argue whether these recipes were standardized or wildly personal, with each scribe tweaking blends for effect. Some say the variations were practical, based on local ingredients. Others think they were status symbols, like a chef's secret sauce. You're leaning toward personal. Mustafa's got a glint in his eye when he talks about his ink, like it's his firstborn. You pour the mixture into a pot to simmer, the steam curling like a genie from a lamp. The workshop's shelves are stuffed with ingredients: indigo for blue, lamb black for depth, even gold dust for special manuscripts. You're tempted to sneak a pinch of gold, but Mustafa's watching. You recall the locked chest under his desk from the last workshop visit, probably hiding his best saffron stash. You stir the pot, the ink thickening, and think about the stakes. A single jar could last months, but a bad batch meant ruined parchment and a ruined reputation. You imagine Mustafa presenting his ink to a palace official, only to hear, "Tablachi, try again." Ouch! The craft's precision is dizzying, and you're starting to see why scribes hoarded their best stuff. Joke number 2. If ink making was a sport, it'd be synchronized swimming graceful. But one splash and you're sunk. You glance at Mustafa, his pen still dancing, and wonder how he balances art and obsession. The workshop's hum grind, stir, scratch pulls you deeper into this inky world. The lamplight flickers, casting golden flecks on the ink's surface. You're heading to the scribe's protective instincts next, where hoarding gets serious. The gallnut dust lingers on your fingers. Mustafa's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's rhythms guiding you. The more you mix, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a tool, it was a scribe's soul, bottled and fiercely guarded. Let's keep drifting. You're still in Mustafa's Istanbul workshop, the air heavy with ink's bitter tang and the faint glow of oil lamps. Your hands are smudged from grinding gallnuts, but you're focused on the locked chest under Mustafa's desk, its iron clasp glinting like a warning. You're here to uncover why Ottoman scribes guarded their ink stashes with such ferocity, treating each vial like a sacred relic. Mainstream history tells us ink was a precious commodity in the Ottoman Empire, often costing more than the parchment it graced. Scribes hoarded it not just for its price, but because a single jar could make or break their reputation. Bad ink meant blotchy scripts, angry patrons, and a tarnished name. You lean closer to the chest, tempted to peek, but Mustafa's Sharp glance stops you cold. The room's quiet, save for the scratch of his pen and the creak of the wooden floor. You notice Mustafa's shelves, lined with clay pots and glass vials, each labeled with cryptic symbols. He's not just protective, he's paranoid, checking his stash like a merchant guarding gold. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes buried their best inks in secret spots, like backyard treasure, to keep them from rivals or thieves. You imagine Mustafa digging a hole under moonlight, whispering to his ink jars, and stifle a chuckle. Joke number 1. Hoarding ink like that makes modern coupon clippers look amateur. You ask Mustafa why the fuss, and he mutters about a rival who once swapped his ink with a watery knockoff. The betrayal's still raw, his script smudged, and a vizier's contract was ruined. You wince, feeling his pain. Historians still argue whether ink hoarding was driven by scarcity or ego. Some say ingredients like saffron or high-grade gallnuts were hard to come by, forcing scribes to stockpile. Others think it was about pride, with each scribe wanting to outshine the rest. You're leaning toward a mix. Mustafa's chest isn't just about supply, it's about control. You recall the beetle-crushed red ink from the last workshop, how it brought life to manuscripts. That kind of quality was rare, and Mustafa's not sharing. You spot a tiny key around his neck, probably for that chest, and wonder what's inside. Maybe a legendary indigo blend or a gold-flecked batch for the Sultan's eyes only. You're half tempted to stage a heist, but your calligraphy skills wouldn't justify the crime. You sit on a cushion, watching Mustafa dip his pen with surgical precision. The stakes are high. A scribe's ink was his signature, his legacy. A perfect manuscript could earn palace favor. A flawed one could mean exile or at least a serious side-eye from the bureaucracy. You think of modern parallels, like hiding your best coffee beans from roommates. But this feels weightier. Joke number 2. If Mustafa had a fridge, he'd label his ink jars "Do not touch" in calligraphy. The workshop's rhythm scratch, dip, lock pulls you deeper. You glance at the chest again, its secrets locked tight, and realize hoarding wasn't just practical. It was personal, a way to protect art and identity in a cutthroat craft. The lamps flicker, casting shadows on the parchment stacks. You're heading to the sacred art of calligraphy next, where ink's value soars even higher. The gallnut smudge lingers on your fingers. Mustafa's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's inky obsession guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a resource. It was a scribe's armor, hoarded to shield their place in a world of beauty and rivalry. Let's keep drifting. You're still in Mustafa's workshop, the air thick with ink and the steady scratch of his reed pen. But now your eyes are glued to the parchment before him, where swirling Arabic letters dance like poetry in motion. Your smudged fingers itch to try, but you're here to learn how calligraphy elevated ink's cultural value in the Ottoman Empire, turning it into a sacred art. Mainstream history tells us calligraphy was more than a skill, it was a spiritual act, revered across the empire for its beauty and connection to the divine. Scribes like Mustafa weren't just writing, they were channeling God's word, especially in Qurans and religious texts, making their ink a holy tool. You pick up a spare reed, mimicking Mustafa's grip, but your attempt at a curve looks like a squashed bug. The room's warm, oil lamps casting a golden glow on the script's glossy lines. Mustafa's latest work, a verse in Naskh script, gleams with jet black ink, each stroke precise as a heartbeat. He explains that a scribe's ink had to be flawless to thin, and it faded to thick, and it clotted, dishonoring the text. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some calligraphers meditated before mixing ink. believing a calm mind infused it with spiritual purity. You imagine Mustafa cross-legged, humming over his gallnuts, and smirk. Joke number 1. Meditative ink making sounds like the Ottoman version of yoga for nerds. You dip your reed again, aiming for a simple line, but it blobs. Mustafa sighs, muttering about patience. You're starting to see why ink was so precious. Calligraphy demanded perfection, and perfection demanded the best tools. Historians still argue whether calligraphy's reverence was purely religious, or also a cultural flex, showcasing Ottoman sophistication to rivals like the Safavids. Some say the art's divine status drove ink's value. Others think it was about imperial pride, with sultans commissioning manuscripts to flaunt wealth. You're leaning toward both. Mustafa's devotion to his script feels spiritual, but you bet he loves the bragging rights too. You recall the locked chest from the last visit, probably stuffed with inks for sacred projects. You notice a small Quran page on his desk, its gold-flecked ink shimmering. It's breathtaking, and you get it. This isn't just writing, it's worship, and the ink's the bridge between scribe and heaven. You lean closer, the parchment sheen pulling you in. The stakes are high. A smudged holy text could be seen as blasphemy, and even secular works like poetry needed flawless ink to impress patrons. You think back to the beetle-crushed red ink, how it brought life to manuscripts, and imagine it here, accenting a sultan's love poem. The workshop's rhythm dip, stroke, pause feels almost hypnotic. You try another line, and it's slightly less terrible. Mustafa grunts, which you take as a win. Joke number 2. If calligraphy was a TikTok trend, you'd be stuck in the before video forever. The art's beauty is humbling, and you see why scribes hoarded their inks. Each jar was a piece of this sacred puzzle. The lamps flicker, their light dancing on the script. You're heading to the bustling bazaar next, where ink's value meets the chaos of trade. The ink's sharp scent lingers, Mustafa's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's artistry guiding you. The more you watch, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a medium, it was a calligrapher's soul, tying their craft to faith and fame. Let's keep drifting. You're now weaving through the chaotic heart of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, the air alive with the shouts of vendors and the clink of copper coins. The sharp scent of Mustafa's ink still lingers in your memory, but here it's drowned out by spices, leather, and sweat. You're here to explore the bustling market where ink vendors hawk their wares, turning the scribe's obsession into a thriving trade. Mainstream history tells us the Grand Bazaar was a hub for exotic goods and ink ingredients. Gallnuts, saffron, gum arabic were hot commodities, often sold in tiny, jewel-like vials for scribes like Mustafa. You dodge a donkey laden with rugs, your robe catching on a stall's edge, and spot a vendor waving a glass jar of glossy black ink like it's a magic potion. The bazaar's a riot of color, its vaulted ceilings echoing with haggling. The vendor, a weary man named Yusuf with a gap-toothed grin, boasts about his ink's unmatched flow. You lean in, catching the familiar gallnut tang, and he offers you a sniff. Pricey, but tempting. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some vendors claimed their inks were blessed by dervishes, promising divine inspiration for scribes. You imagine Yusuf sprinkling holy water on his vials for extra profit and smirk. Joke number 1. Blessed ink sounds like the Ottoman equivalent of slapping organic on a smoothie. You haggle, but Yusuf's firm scribes pay top coin for quality, and he knows it. You glance at nearby stalls, piled with indigo powders and cochineal beetles, remembering the red ink Mustafa loved. This market's the lifeline for his craft. Historians still argue whether the ink trade was driven by scribes' demand or savvy merchants inflating prices. Some say scarcity of ingredients like high-grade saffron pushed costs up. Others think vendors hyped rare blends to lure elite clients. You're leaning toward merchants. Yusuf's got a salesman's glint, and his dervish blessed pitch is pure hustle. You recall Mustafa's locked chest, probably filled with bizarre finds like these. You buy a tiny vial of crimson ink. Its weight light, but its price heavy. Holding it, you feel the scribe's urgency. Without this, their calligraphy's just scratches. The bazaar's chaos swirls around you. A woman sells rose water, a boy hawks pistachios, and Yusuf's already pitching to another scribe, his voice rising over the din. You slip the vial into your robe, dodging a cart of pomegranates. The stakes here are clear. A scribe's reputation rides on their ink, and the bazaars where they hunt for perfection. You think back to Mustafa's Quran page, its gold-flecked script glowing, and realize every stroke started here, in this noisy maze. You imagine him haggling with Yusuf, guarding his coins like his inks. Joke number 2. If Mustafa shopped online, he'd still haggle over shipping fees for saffron. The market's rhythm shout, clink, shuffle pulls you deeper. You're starting to see why scribes hoarded their stashes in this sea of vendors. Finding the right ink feels like a quest. The bazaar's lanterns sway, casting flickering shadows on the stalls. You're heading to the imperial court next, where Sultan's demands push ink's value even higher. The crimson vial's weight lingers in your pocket. Yusuf's voice fades, and you move forward, the era's trade guiding you. The more you explore, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just bought, it was battled for. A prize in a market as cutthroat as the scribe's world. Let's keep drifting. You're now standing in the opulent halls of Topkap Palace, the air heavy with rose water and the rustle of silk caftans. The crimson ink vial from the bazaar is still tucked in your robe, but you're distracted by the grandeur marble floors, gilded arches, and mosaics that shimmer like a peacock's tail. You're here to see how Sultan's decrees drove Ottoman scribes to chase flawless inks, turning their hoarding into a high-stakes mission. Mainstream history tells us the Ottoman court demanded perfection in its documents, from imperial firmans to diplomatic letters, and scribes like Mustafa relied on the finest inks to meet these standards. A single smudge could mean disgrace, so only the glossiest, most durable blends would do. You clutch your vial, feeling like an imposter among the palace's stern viziers, their turbans bobbing as they inspect a freshly inked scroll. A scribe, Ibrahim, presents his work to a vizier, his hands trembling slightly. The Firmina Sultan's order gleams with jet-black ink, its calligraphy crisp as a winter morning. You lean closer, catching the ink's faint metallic sheen. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some palace inks were mixed with crushed pearls for extra luster, a flex to impress foreign ambassadors. You imagine Ibrahim grinding pearls like a barista frothing a latte and smirk. Joke number 1. Pearl ink sounds like the Ottoman version of bedazzling your homework. The vizier nods, but his eyes scan for flaws. Ibrahim's ink had better hold up, or he's out of a job. You recall Mustafa's locked chest, probably stuffed with blends fit for this very court. Historians still argue whether imperial demands shaped ink quality, or if scribes' perfectionism drove the trend. Some say Sultan's obsession with grandeur pushed scribes to hoard elite ingredients. Others think scribes set their own high standards to climb the palace ranks. You're leaning toward the Sultan's Ibrahim's sweating under the vizier's gaze, and you bet a royal tantrum over a blotch would send any scribe scrambling for better ink. You glance at the firman, its script flowing like a river. The stakes are dizzying. These documents sealed alliances, declared wars, or granted lands. A faulty ink could fade, misrepresent the Sultan's will, or worse, insult a rival empire. You're glad you're not Ibrahim right now. You shift your weight, the marble cool under your slippers. The palace hums with whispers, eunuchs gliding by, a poet reciting in the corner. You think back to the bazaar's chaos, where Yusuf sold that dervish blessed ink, likely destined for a scribe like Ibrahim. The court's demands trickle down, making every gall nut and saffron thread a piece of imperial power. You imagine Mustafa here, his Quran page from the workshop presented to the Sultan himself. Would his ink pass muster? You smirk, picturing a vizier sniffing the page like a wine critic. Joke number 2. If palace scribes had Yelp, they'd rate their inks 5 stars for Sultan-approved shine. The hall's splendor is lulling, the mosaics blurring into a golden haze. You're heading to the mystical side of ink necks, where scribes see magic in their vials. The crimson vial's weight lingers, Ibrahim's pen rests, and you move forward, the era's grandeur guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a scribe's tool, it was a key to the empire's heart, hoarded to meet the Sultan's unyielding gaze. Let's keep drifting. You're now back in Mustafa's workshop, the familiar scent of gallnut ink mingling with the flicker of oil lamps. But the mood feels different, almost otherworldly. The crimson vial from the bazaar rests in your robe, and you're still buzzing from the palace's grandeur. But you're here to uncover the mystical allure of ink. How Ottoman scribes believed it held spiritual and magical powers. Mainstream history tells us that in the Ottoman Empire, calligraphy was seen as a sacred act, and the inks used to craft holy texts or imperial decrees were often imbued with symbolic meaning, sometimes thought to carry divine protection. You're sitting cross-legged on a cushion, watching Mustafa mix a new batch. His movements slow and reverent, like a priest at an altar. The room's quiet. The only sound his soft humming and the gentle clink of glass vials. Mustafa sprinkles a pinch of indigo powder into his pot, muttering a prayer under his breath. He believes this ink, destined for a mosque's Quran, will shield the text from time's decay. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes added drops of rose water blessed by Sufi mystics, claiming it made their ink sing with spiritual energy. You imagine Mustafa spritzing his ink like it's artisanal perfume and stifle a chuckle. Joke number 1. Rose water ink sounds like the Ottoman equivalent of a chakra-lined smoothie. You ask to try stirring, and he hands you the ladle, but warns you to focus. Apparently, a distracted mind could weaken the ink's power. You stir carefully, feeling oddly like you're casting a spell. Historians still argue whether these mystical beliefs were genuine, or a way to elevate scribes' status in a competitive field. Some say the spiritual angle was rooted in Islamic reverence for the written word. Others think scribes played it up to justify their ink hoarding and high fees. You're leaning toward genuine. Mustafa's prayer feels real, his eyes fixed on the ink like it's a living thing. You recall the pearl-crushed ink from the palace, meant to dazzle ambassadors, and wonder if it carried a blessing. You notice a small amulet on Mustafa's desk, etched with Arabic script, probably to ward off ink-ruining jinn. You're tempted to ask if it works on clumsy apprentices like you, but you hold back. You dip a reed pen into the fresh ink, its deep blue gleaming like a night sky. The stroke you make is wobbly, but Mustafa nods, saying the ink's spirit is strong. You're not sure if he's humoring you, but the idea's captivating ink as a conduit for something bigger. You think back to the bazaar, where Yusuf peddled dervish blessed vials, and realize this mysticism fueled the trade. Scribes hoarded these special blends not just for quality, but for their supposed magic, a shield against fate or failure. You smirk, imagining a modern equivalent. Like charging your laptop with positive vibes for better code. Joke number 2. If my Wi-Fi had Mustafa's ink prayers, maybe it wouldn't drop during Zoom calls. The workshop's warmth is lulling, the lamplight softening the room's edges. You're heading to the rivalries between scribes' necks, where ink becomes a battleground. The indigo ink scent lingers, Mustafa's humming fades, and you move forward, the era's mysticism guiding you. The more you stir, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a tool, it was a talisman, hoarded for its power to connect scribes to the divine and the Empire's soul. Let's keep drifting. You're still in Mustafa's workshop, the air thick with the sharp scent of indigo ink and the soft glow of oil lamps. But now there's tension humming beneath the surface. Your robe sleeve is smudged from your clumsy pen strokes. But you're too caught up in the drama to care. You're here to witness the rivalries between Ottoman scribes, where feuds over ink quality spark clashes as fierce as any bizarre brawl. Mainstream history tells us that calligraphy was a competitive field in the Ottoman Empire, with scribes vying for patronage from sultans, viziers, and wealthy merchants. The finest inks, glossy, durable, vibrant, were a scribe's edge. And Mustafa's not the only one hoarding them. You glance at him, his jaw tight as he mentions a rival, Ahmed, whose ink supposedly outshone his at a recent palace commission. The room's warm, but the vibe's chilly, the scratch of Mustafa's pen sounding almost defiant. Mustafa points to a smudged scroll on his desk, a gift from Ahmed that he suspects was sabotaged with inferior ink. The blotch is subtle, but to Mustafa, it's a declaration of war. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes spread rumors that rivals' inks were cursed, hoping to scare off clients. You imagine Mustafa whispering about Ahmed's gin-tainted vials and smirk. Joke number 1. Cursed ink sounds like the Ottoman version of leaving a bad Yelp review. You ask Mustafa about the feud, and he grumbles about Ahmed's flashy crimson ink. Which one of Vizier's praise? You recall the crimson vial in your robe from the bazaar. Could it be Ahmed's blend? You keep quiet, not wanting to pick a side. In this inky grudge match, historians still argue whether these rivalries were purely professional or deeply personal. Some say scribes competed for scarce resources like high-grade saffron. Others think egos drove the drama, with each wanting to be the Empire's top calligrapher. You're leaning toward personal. Mustafa's muttering about Ahmed feels like a sibling spat, not just business. You notice a stack of Ahmed's work on a shelf, its script undeniably sharp. Mustafa keeps it to study, he says, but you suspect he's secretly impressed. You think back to the palace firman. Its pearl-crushed ink a flex for imperial eyes. Rivalries like this pushed scribes to hoard their best inks, ensuring their work stood out in a crowded field. You're tempted to challenge Mustafa to an ink-off, but your squashed bug strokes wouldn't stand a chance. You sit on a cushion, watching Mustafa adjust his turban, his pride as palpable as the ink's tang. The stakes are high. A scribe's reputation could soar with a single manuscript or crash with a smudge. You imagine Ahmed gloating at a coffee house, his crimson ink the talk of Istanbul. It's not just about art. It's about survival in a world where patrons are picky and mistakes are public. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like programmers beefing over who's got the slickest code editor. Joke number 2. If scribes had social media, Mustafa and Ahmed would be sut-weeding each other's ink recipes. The workshop's rhythms scratch, dip, scowl pulls you deeper. The feud adding a sharp edge to the craft's beauty. The lamps flicker, casting shadows on the smudged scroll. You're heading to the exotic imports fueling this ink mania next, where distant trade routes feed the scribe's obsession. The indigo scent lingers. Mustafa's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's rivalries guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon, hoarded to win battles of skill and pride. Let's keep drifting. You're now aboard a creaking merchant ship docked at Istanbul's bustling port. The air sharp with salt and the tang of tar, the horizon glowing with the late afternoon sun. The crimson vial from the bazaar is still tucked in your robe. It's a reminder of Mustafa's feud with Ahmed. But you're here to trace the exotic imports that fuel the scribe's ink mania. Mainstream history tells us the Ottoman Empire's trade routes brought rare ingredients. Saffron from Persia, cochineal from the Levant, gum Arabic from Sudan that scribes like Mustafa hoarded to craft their prized inks. You're leaning against a wooden crate, watching sailors unload sacks of gallnuts and vials of indigo, each bound for the bazaar and workshops beyond. The port's a chaos of shouts, flapping sails, and the splash of oars. But every crate feels like a piece of the scribe's world. A merchant, Hassan, with a sun-weathered face, opens a sack to reveal saffron threads glowing like tiny embers. He brags about its journey from Isfahan, a 6-month trek by camel and ship. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some traders swore their cochineal beetles were fed special diets to deepen their red hue, like pampered livestock. You imagine beetles dining on rose petals and chuckle. Joke number 1. Fancy-fed beetles sound like the Ottoman version of artisanal coffee beans. You touch the saffron, its scent sharp and sweet, and realize why Mustafa guards his stash. This stuff's worth more than gold. Hassan offers you a pinch, but his price makes your eyes water. You stick with your crimson vial, likely made from these very imports. Historians still argue whether trade routes shaped ink quality or if scribes' demands pushed merchants to seek rarer goods. Some say global networks naturally supplied exotic ingredients. Others think scribes' obsession with unique inks drove traders to far-flung markets. You're leaning toward the scribes. Hassan's tales of risky voyages suggest he's catering to picky calligraphers like Mustafa. You recall the dervish blessed ink from the bazaar, probably spiked with this saffron. You spot a crate of gum Arabic, its resin gleaming like amber, and think of Mustafa's workshop, where it thickened his blends. Every jar he hoards started here, on ships braving storms and pirates to feed the empire's inky hunger. You step onto the dock, dodging a sailor hauling a wicker basket of indigo cakes. The stakes are clear. Without these imports, Mustafa's calligraphy would fade, his reputation with it. You imagine him haggling for this saffron, his feud with Ahmed fueled by who scored the better batch. The port's energy is dizzying, but you see the scribe's world in every crate, a global web spun for their pens. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like overnighting rare pigments for a painting. Joke number 2. If Mustafa had Amazon Prime, he'd still stress over saffron delivery times. The port's rhythm creak, shout, splash pulls you deeper. The trade routes tying Istanbul to distant lands. The sun dips lower, painting the sea gold. You're heading to the hidden world of women scribes' necks, where ink's power reaches unexpected hands. The crimson vial's weight lingers, Hassan's voice fades, and you move forward. The era's trade guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just local, it was a global treasure, hoarded to keep. The scribe's art alive and unrivaled. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a quiet courtyard tucked behind an Istanbul madrasa. The air soft with jasmine and the distant murmur of a fountain. The crimson vial from the bazaar still sits in your robe, its weight a faint echo of the port's chaos. But you're here to meet women scribes, who quietly master ink and calligraphy in a male-dominated craft. Mainstream history tells us that while Ottoman calligraphy was largely a man's domain, some women, often from scholarly or elite families, trained as scribes. Their work gracing private manuscripts or religious texts. You're seated on a stone bench, watching a woman named Fatma, her veil pinned back, dip her reed pen into a glossy black ink with the same precision as Mustafa. The courtyard serene, shaded by a fig tree, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Fatma's script, a flowing thaluth, curls across the parchment, each stroke as bold as any man's. She learned from her father, a court scribe, and now crafts poetry for a wealthy patron. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women scribes hid their work under male pseudonyms, their inks and scripts passing as a man's to avoid scrutiny. You imagine Fatma signing her work Fatih and slipping it into the bazaar, and you smirk. Joke number 1. Pseudonyms were probably the Ottoman version of catfishing, but with better handwriting. You ask to try her pen, but your line wobbles like a drunk camel. Fatma smiles, suggesting you stick to admiring her inks she made. She whispers, with a secret dash of myrrh. Historians still argue whether women scribes were rare exceptions or a hidden network, their contributions downplayed by male chroniclers. Some say they were few, limited by social barriers. Others believe many worked in private, their inks as prized as any man's. You're leaning toward the network. Fatma's confidence suggests she's not alone. You recall Mustafa's feud with Ahmed, their ink rivalries loud and public, and contrast it with Fatma's quiet focus. Her ink, stored in a carved wooden box, is as fiercely guarded as Mustafa's locked chest. You spot a vial of crimson, like yours, and wonder if she haggled for it in the bazaar or mixed it herself. Maybe. With those beetle-fed cochineal imports from the port. You lean closer, the parchment's glow pulling you in. Fatma's work is stunning, but it's her defiance that captivates you. She's carving a place in a world that rarely acknowledges her. You think back to the palace firman, its pearl-crushed ink a symbol of power, and wonder if Fatma's scripts ever reached such heights, unsigned but flawless. The stakes are high. A woman scribe's mistake could be mocked as proof of her unfitness. Yet Fatma's hand is steady. You smirk, imagining her outinking Mustafa and Ahmed in a secret showdown. Joke number 2. If women scribes had a group chat, they'd probably roast the men's smudgy scrolls. The courtyard's calm dip, stroke, rustle wraps you in its rhythm. Fatma's art, a hidden gem in the Empire's inky saga. The fountain's murmur softens, the fig tree's shadow lengthening. You're heading to the legal world next, where ink's quality proves a document's truth. The crimson vial's weight lingers, Fatma's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's quiet rebels guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just for men, it was a craft where women, too, hoarded their power, one stroke at a time. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a dimly lit chamber of an Istanbul courthouse, the air heavy with the scent of old parchment and the faint clink of a scribe's inkpot. The crimson vial from the bazaar still nestles in your robe, a quiet link to Fatma's courtyard. But you're here to examine how ink quality proved the authenticity of Ottoman legal documents. Mainstream history tells us that in the Ottoman Empire, legal texts, deeds, contracts, and court rulings relied on specific inks to ensure their legitimacy, with judges often inspecting the sheen and durability to detect forgeries. You're standing beside a qadi, a stern judge in a green turban, as he scrutinizes a land deed, its black ink gleaming under a flickering oil lamp. The room's austere, with wooden benches and stacks of scrolls. But the tension's thick as the caddy's pen hovers over the document. The deed's calligraphy is crisp, its ink deep and unblemished, likely mixed with the gall nuts and saffron you saw in Mustafa's workshop. The caddy nods, satisfied, but you catch him sniffing the parchment, as if the ink scent holds secrets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some courts used signature inks, unique blends only certain scribes could produce to mark official documents, like an early anti-fraud watermark. You imagine a scribe like Fatma crafting a secret crimson blend for a caddy and smirk. Joke number 1. Signature inks were probably the Ottoman version of a blockade for bureaucrats. You ask to see the deed, and the caddy hands it over, warning you not to smudge it. Your fingers tremble. One blotch, and you're the courtroom's new villain. Historians still argue whether ink's role in law was about practicality or prestige. Some say durable inks were essential to preserve records in humid Istanbul. Others think elite scribes used rare blends to flex their status, impressing judges with their craft. You're leaning toward both. The caddy's scrutiny feels practical, but his pride in the deed's beauty suggests status matters too. You recall the pearl-crushed ink from the palace, meant to dazzle, and wonder if this deed's ink has a similar flair, maybe a dash of indigo from the port's imports. You notice a clerk nearby, his fingers stained, guarding a locked box of ink vials. It's like Mustafa's chest, a reminder that scribes hoarded their best blends to meet these exacting standards. You trace the deed script, its loops as precise as Fatma's thaluth. The stakes are high. A faded or forged document could void a family's land rights, or spark a merchant's ruin. You think back to the bazaar, where Yusuf peddled dervish blessed inks, and realize those blends might end up here, under a caddy's gaze. The courtroom's rhythm scratch, shuffle, murmur feels like a pulse, each inked line tying lives to the empire's law. You smirk, imagining a modern equivalent, like a lawyer obsessing over the perfect printer toner for a contract. Joke number 2. If caddies had email, they'd probably demand PDF signatures in Sultan-approved black. The deed's weight in your hands grounds you, its ink a silent witness to justice. The lamp's glow softens, casting shadows on the scrolls. You're heading to the murky origins of Ottoman inks next, where scholars debate their roots. The crimson vial's weight lingers, the caddy's pen rests, and you move forward, the era's legal world guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a scribe's tool. It was a cornerstone of trust, hoarded to uphold the empire's order. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a sunlit Istanbul library, the air rich with the musty scent of ancient manuscripts and the faint rustle of turning pages. The crimson vial from the bazaar still sits in your robe, a quiet tie to the courtroom's tension. But you're here to delve into the murky origins of Ottoman inks, where scholars debate how these prized blends came to be. Mainstream history tells us Ottoman inks evolved from earlier Islamic traditions, blending Persian, Arab, and Byzantine techniques with local innovations to create the glossy, durable formulas scribes like Mustafa hoarded. You're seated at a long wooden table, surrounded by turbaned scholars poring over brittle scrolls, their fingers tracing recipes for gall nut and lamb black blends. The room's quiet, save for the scratch of quills and the occasional cough, but the debate's as lively as the bazaar, with whispered arguments over ink's true roots. A scholar named Omar, his beard flecked with gray, points to a faded manuscript, claiming its ink recipe heavy on indigo and gum Arabic came from 10th century Baghdad. Another, Layla, counters that Ottoman scribes perfected it with saffron from Anatolia. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some texts suggest early inks were tested by dipping them in wine to check durability, a trick supposedly borrowed from Byzantine monks. You imagine Mustafa dunking his ink in a goblet and smirk. Joke number 1. Wine-tested ink sounds like the Ottoman version of a stress test for sommeliers. You flip through a scroll, its script still vibrant after centuries, and wonder which recipe Baghdadi or local gave it life. Your own pen strokes from Fatma's courtyard wouldn't survive a wine dip, that's for sure. Historians still argue whether Ottoman inks were mostly imported knowledge or a homegrown leap. Some say trade routes, like those you saw at the port, brought Persian and Arab formulas. Others insist local scribes, experimenting with Anatolian plants and minerals, crafted something new. You're leaning toward a Mixomar's Baghdad claim. Holds weight, but Layla's pride in Ottoman tweaks feels right too. You recall the cochineal beetles from the port, fed fancy diets for red ink, and the dervish blessed vials from the bazaar. Those feel uniquely Ottoman, a blend of global imports and local flair. You notice a small clay pot on the table, labeled Anatolian Black, and imagine Mustafa or Fatma mixing it for a caddy's deed. Its origins debated even then. You lean back, the scroll's ink gleaming under the sunlight streaming through latticed windows. The stakes here are less about law and more about legacy, whose recipe gets the credit shapes how history sees the empire's genius. You think back to the palace firman, its pearl-crushed ink a flex of power, and wonder if its formula came from Baghdad or a local workshop. The library's rhythm flip, whisper, scratch pulls you deeper. The debate a puzzle with no clear answer. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like techies arguing over who invented the first app. Joke number 2. If scholars had X, they'd be thread-jacking each other's ink origin hot takes. The manuscript's weight grounds you. It's ink, a bridge to a past still being unraveled. The sunlight softens, casting golden flecks on the scrolls. You're heading to the scribe's innovations next, where hoarding sparks new ink creations. The crimson vial's weight lingers, Omar's voice fades, and you move forward. The era's debates guiding you. The more you read, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a craft, it was a mystery, hoarded to fuel a legacy of art and argument. Let's keep drifting. You're back in Mustafa's workshop, the air thick with the familiar bite of gallnut ink and the soft flicker of oil lamps. But now there's a spark of experimentation in the room. The crimson vial from the bazaar rests in your robe, a quiet link to the library's debates. But you're here to see how ink hoarding sparked innovation, pushing Ottoman scribes to create even better blends. Mainstream history tells us that the intense competition and high stakes of calligraphy drove scribes to tinker with their ink recipes, blending new ingredients or refining old ones to achieve unmatched clarity and durability. You're hunched over a cluttered table, watching Mustafa grind a strange new powdered lapis lazuli. He says with a mortar and pestle, his eyes gleaming like he's on the verge of a breakthrough. The workshop's alive with the clink of glass and the scratch of test strokes. A laboratory of inky ambition. Mustafa mixes the lapis with gum arabic and a dash of honey, claiming it'll yield a blue ink that sings on parchment. You're skeptical but intrigued. Honey sounds sticky, not revolutionary. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes tested their inks by writing on eggshells, believing a blend that didn't crack the shell was tough enough for legal deeds. You imagine Mustafa balancing an egg like a fragile canvas and smirk. Joke number 1. Eggshell tests sound like the Ottoman version of a cooking show challenge gone wrong. You ask to try grinding, and Mustafa hands you the pestle, but your mix clumps like bad oatmeal. He sighs, muttering about patience. but you're hooked on the idea of inventing something new. Historians still argue whether these innovations were driven by necessity or a desire to outshine rivals. Some say scribes like Mustafa tweaked recipes to meet the demands of humid Istanbul's climate, where ink could smudge. Others think it was about ego, with each scribe chasing a signature blend to cement their fame. You're leaning toward rivalry. Mustafa's muttering about besting Ahmed's crimson ink feels personal, like a chef perfecting a recipe to one-up a competitor. You recall the courtroom deed, its ink scrutinized for authenticity, and imagine Mustafa's new blue blend passing a caddy's sniff test. You notice a row of test parchments on the wall, some faded, others vibrant, proof of his relentless experiments. Your own wobbly strokes from Fatma's courtyard wouldn't make the cut here. You dip a reed into Mustafa's latest batch, the blue ink flowing smoother than you expected. Your stroke's still a mess, but the color's stunning, like a slice of summer sky. The stakes are high. A breakthrough ink could win Mustafa a palace contract, or immortalize his name in a mosque's Quran. You think back to the bazaar's saffron and the port's cochineal. How global trade fed this tinkering. Mustafa's hoarding isn't just about keeping ink, it's about having enough to experiment, to risk failure for glory. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a coder burning through coffee to debug a killer app. Joke number 2. If Mustafa had a lab coat, he'd be the mad scientist of calligraphy. The workshop's rhythm grind, mix, stroke pulls you deeper, the air buzzing with possibility. The lamps glow softly, casting sapphire flecks on the ink. You're heading to the decline of this inky culture next, where printing presses challenge the scribe's reign. The lapis dust lingers on your fingers, Mustafa's pen scratches on, and you move forward, the era's ingenuity guiding you. The more you mix, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a tool, it was a canvas for innovation, hoarded to fuel a scribe's quest for perfection. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a bustling Istanbul street, the air sharp with the tang of charcoal and the clatter of carts. But a new sound cuts through a rhythmic clunk from a nearby building. The crimson vial from the bazaar still sits in your robe. Its weight a fading echo of Mustafa's lapis experiments. But you're here to watch the decline of the scribe's inky reign. As printing presses challenge their craft, mainstream history tells us that by the late 17th century, printing technology, introduced to the Ottoman Empire, began to shift document production from handwritten manuscripts to mass-printed pages, threatening the scribe's monopoly and their need to hoard precious inks. You're standing outside a printer's shop, peering through a latticed window at a wooden press, its ink rollers smearing a dull black onto paper. The street hums with vendors and stray cats, but the press's thud feels like a warning of change. Inside, a printer named Selim wipes his hands on an apron, stacking printed pamphlets that lack the calligraphy's grace but are cheap and quick. You compare them to Mustafa's shimmering Quran page and wince. They're functional, not art. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early Ottoman printers sometimes mixed inks with leftover scribe recipes, hoping to mimic calligraphy's sheen. But the results were often blotchy. You imagine Selim stirring all nuts like a hopeful alchemist and smirk. Joke number 1. Printed ink trying to be calligraphy is like instant coffee pretending it's espresso. You step inside, the presses clunk, deafening, and ask Selim about scribes. He shrugs, saying they're stuck in the past, but you sense his envy of their craft's beauty. Historians still argue whether printing's rise killed scribal culture or just reshaped it. Some say presses made books accessible, reducing the need for hand ink to manuscripts. Others think scribes adapted, focusing on elite commissions like palace firmans. You're leaning toward a slow death. Selim's pamphlets are already everywhere, and Mustafa's ink chest feels like a relic. You recall Fatma's Thuluth script, its elegance unmatched by these blocky prints, and the courtroom deed, where ink's sheen proved truth. Printing can't replicate that. Not yet, but its speed is winning. You pick up a pamphlet, its ink smudging under your thumb, and wonder if Mustafa's seen this. His feud with Ahmed over Crimson Blend seems quaint when presses churn out pages by the dozen. You wander back to the street, the press's thud fading behind you. The stakes are clear. Scribes' hoarding was born from a world where every stroke mattered, but printing's changing the game. You think back to the bazaar's saffron, the port's cochineal, all fueling a craft now under siege. You imagine Mustafa or Fatma visiting this shop, their pens idle, their inks gathering dust. It's a bittersweet shift, like watching vinyl lose to streaming. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like artisans raging against 3D printers. Joke number 2. If Mustafa saw this press, he'd probably challenge it to a duel with his reed pen. The streets bustle, clop, shout, clunk pulls you deeper. The era's transition, a quiet ache beneath the noise. The sun dips low, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. You're heading to the lasting legacy of ink necks, where the scribe's world fades into memory. The crimson vial's weight lingers, Selim's press thuds on, and you move forward. The era's change is guiding you. The more you see, the clearer it becomes. Ink wasn't just a scribe's lifeblood, it was a fading art, hoarded fiercely as its time ran out. Let's keep drifting. You're now in a quiet Istanbul garden, the air soft with the scent of blooming roses and the gentle trickle of a marble fountain. The crimson vial from the bazaar still rests in your robe, a faint reminder of Selim's printing press. But you're here to reflect on the enduring legacy of Ottoman inks as the scribe's era drifts into memory. Mainstream history tells us that while printing presses diminished the scribe's dominance, their calligraphy and ink craft left a lasting mark, influencing art, literature, and even modern typography across the Islamic world. You're seated on a stone bench, a weathered manuscript open on your lap, its ink still vibrant after centuries, telling stories of Mustafa, Fatma, and their hoarded treasures. The garden serene, the sunset painting the sky in saffron and indigo, colors that echo the inks you've come to know. You trace the manuscript script, its loops as graceful as Fatma's Thuluth, its black ink likely mixed with the gallnuts. You ground in Mustafa's workshop. The scribe's world is fading, but their inks endure in museum cases and private collections. Each jar a snapshot of an empire's soul. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some modern calligraphers still hunt for Ottoman ink recipes, recreating them like chefs reviving ancient dishes. You imagine a hipster scribe brewing all-nut ink in a Brooklyn loft and smirk. Joke number 1. Chasing Ottoman recipes today is probably the calligraphy equivalent of vinyl snobbery. You turn the page, the ink sheen catching the light, and feel a pang for the workshops, bazaars, and rivalries that birthed it. Historians still argue whether the scribe's legacy lies in their art or their cultural impact. Some say their calligraphy shaped Islamic aesthetics, from mosque domes to book covers. Others think their true gift was preserving knowledge through durable inks that survived time. You're leaning toward both. The manuscript in your hands is art and archive. Its ink a bridge to the past. You recall the courtroom deed, its ink proving truth, and the palace firman, its pearl-crushed sheen a flecks of power. Even the printing press, for all its clunking efficiency, couldn't erase this beauty. You think of Fatma's hidden scripts, Mustafa's feud with Ahmed, and wonder if their inks still whisper in these lines. They're hoarding, a quiet act of defiance against time. You lean back, The fountain's murmur blending with the rustle of leaves. The scribe's whirled its locked chests, blessed vials. Eggshell tests feels distant, but its echoes linger in every curve of this script. You imagine Mustafa's pride, Fatma's steady hand, and even Selim's press, all part of a story that outlives them. The garden's calm wraps you up, the manuscript's weight grounding you. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a coder's algorithm living on in an app long after they're gone. Joke number 2. If scribes had hashtags, hashtagging legacy would trend for centuries. The sunset deepens, and you're ready to let this world fade, its inky heart still beating in the pages you hold. Wind down your resting now, the garden melting into a gentle haze, the fountain's trickle softening to a whisper. The weight of the manuscript, the scribes' rivalries, their hoarded inks, it all dissolves, leaving only the rustle of roses and the cool evening air. You're safe here, wrapped in the quiet of a world that's left its mark, its inks glowing in memory like stars. Let your breathing slow, each exhale long and unhurried, your body sinking into the bench's embrace. The stories of Mustafa, Fatma, and their crimson vials linger, but they're distant now, fading into the sunset's glow. You don't need to hold them. The garden's warmth fades, the air grows still, and you're drifting, carried by a calm that feels eternal. Sleep's waiting, soft and sure, ready to cradle you as gently as a scribe's pen on parchment. Close your eyes, let go, and rest.